We go over to another framework. I'm going to show you a whole bunch of standards. This standard is called Certified B Corporations. And I've just pulled this picture up, I think yesterday. So there are literally 3,762 of these in the world right now, in 74 countries. It's a system, it's a nonprofit. So it's a certification run by a nonprofit. And that nonprofit has a methodology that you go through to figure out whether or not you're a good company. And if you're good enough, they will certify you. If you're good enough and you pay them a fee, they will certify you. That system is called a GIIRS rating, Global Impact Investing Rating, right? And this is their words from their website on what a GIIRS rating is. And a GIIRS rating covers 5 different topics. It used to cover 3, and then they added a 4th, and then now they've added a 5th section you have to fill out. And so they're asking questions about how your company's governed. They're asking questions about how you treat your community, how you treat the environment, how you treat your customers. Each of those is scored, and you can see they have a certain number of questions in each one. And this is a screenshot of a half filled out survey. And then at the end, you have basically prove what you said is true. That's what the disclosure questions are about. It's scored out of a total of 200 points. And if you get 80 points and higher, you can be certified as a B Corp. Questions are like this, right? So this is a good question about governance. Does your company have a corporate mission statement? Does it include any of the following in the mission statement? And so you check them off. And if you check off anything besides no, you get a point, right? 1 point out of 200. We can go over to the environmental side, and they ask, do you have a recycling program inside your company? Again, you can check all these off as long as you don't click off none of the above, you get a point. Third question, again, back to ownership, and I think it's in the governance section, is what percentage of the company is owned by, and then it says women, underrepresented populations, low-income communities. And depending on how much you have, you can get up to 3.64 points, right? So 0 would give you 0, don't know would give you 0, and then each of the other ones will give you a number. All right, so what you should take away from this is, in terms of GIIRS rating, is they are looking at a wide variety of both internal and external impacts. I didn't show you a single question that actually asked, what does your company do? That wasn't added until they were about 6 or 8 years into the system. Most of their questions are asking, how do you do? It's really related to the kind of the ESG space. How do you operate your company? Who owns your company? Who are the stakeholders? Are you listening to your stakeholders? You know, literally, are you recycling? And the one thing, other thing to take away from this is that there's literally a committee that meets every 2 years. They choose the questions and they choose the number of points for each answer. So it's a committee's choice on whether or not ownership by women and unrepresented populations is worth more than recycling. Which one's better in terms of impact? There's a external group that's deciding that, and they're actually deciding, you know, how to distribute these 3.64 points over these answers as well. So here's a result. Here's an old B impact score from, I think this one from 2015. I know it says 2012. We were certified in 2012. This is my company, so I'm happy to show this one off. We're not certified anymore, but we still do what we said we did. And you can see we scored 111 out of 200. Right, higher numbers better. Anything over 80 is sufficient, and you can see the median scores here. And so we were proud to be a certified B Corp back when there were just hundreds of these companies. And we sent lots and lots of people over to that B impact assessment to not only to certify them, but just filling out that survey, just filling out that questionnaire gives you many, many, many good ideas on how to run a better company, on things that you didn't think of that will make your company more impactful, right, internally. And then here's 3 more companies that were all certified B Corps. They've all failed. They're all the same. They're all separate companies doing the same thing, which was co-working, impact-focused co-working. And I just wanted to show you, you know, just to pull this up, in terms of those 3 things, measuring, comparing, and aggregating. So in terms of measuring, we got 3 different scores here. So my hub in Seattle got the highest score. They got 100, 87 in Boulder, 86 in San Francisco. Okay, so there we got some measurements. Are they comparable measurements? Well, these two are close. We could say the assessment's pretty good at closeness, but we got 13 more in, 13 or 14 more in Seattle. We can kind of dig into why, but it doesn't necessarily mean that Seattle's better than Boulder or San Francisco. It just might be, it literally might be that we have more women ownership. That might have been the whole thing. It might be that we have better, not just recycling, but just better processes for buying from vendors. We buy from more local vendors or women or disadvantaged group vendors. That could give us the points. It's very hard to compare with these numbers. They're not really apples and apples numbers, and you can't add them together. So if you were an owner of all three of these companies, if you thought this was a good business, which it wasn't, and you invested in all three, well, what then? Is it the average number of these three? Is it the sum total? There isn't a really good way to deal with aggregation here. It doesn't, probably in this case, since they're all the same style company, you would take an average. But if you then added in a solar company on top of this, maybe we wanted to put solar on the roofs of these buildings. Well, where do we do? Do we take an average of the four companies and solar just counts as a fourth? Or is it half? Or, is it weighted by amount of money you've put in? It's hard. It's complicated. So let's move on, right? It doesn't really, the takeaway from that is it doesn't answer that question. The GIIRS rating does not do aggregation. So let's move on to another industry standard group. It's called the GIIN. The GIIN is the Global Impact Investing Network, and they produce standards. They're a organization that works on advocacy and standards. And one of their standards is called IRIS, or it's now called IRIS Plus. And I don't remember what that acronym stands for, but it's impact measurement. That's what IRIS is for. And they have 22,000 people who have registered to use this system. This is how they describe what their system is. So it's a framework for impact measurement. That is the clear piece, and a way to communicate that with the outside world. I think they're on IRIS 5 now. These standards keep getting updated, but my slides are from back in IRIS 4. And in IRIS 4, they had 559 standardized measurements for measuring the, not just impact of the company, but measuring key performance indicators inside of a company. And so each one of these was, again, created by committee. They sat down and they said, these are things that are useful for measuring companies. Each one has a name. Each one has a unique identifier so that we can make sure we're doing apples and apples comparison. They all have a fill in the blank reporting period, because maybe you report weekly and maybe someone else does monthly and someone else does quarterly, someone else does annually. There's a description for each one. And so here's some examples. So greenhouse gas reductions due to products sold is I don't know if we'll call it PI 5376. They describe what it is. There's some categorizations. There's that ID. And again, if you clicked in on this, you would have some more details. Area of land reforested, right? PI 4907. I think I have another one on here. How about disease conditions addressed? PI 1533, right? So here are three completely separate and different ways to measure the impact of companies. And what you would do if you're using the IRIS system is that you would pick 4 or 5 of these, right, out of 500 and change. And that would be the measurement that you would be talking about with your stakeholders. Now, the question, of course, again, comes back to, that's good. And if we have exactly the same 5 metrics picked by 2 companies, then we have an apples and apples comparison. If we have 3 that overlap, if they're each picking 5 and that 3 of these IRIS metrics overlap, we have an apples and apples comparison with some accoutrement on the side. But if we have 5 picked from each company and there's nothing overlapping, then we have a hard time. Again, we're back to the open question of how do we compare? And no matter what, we can't add these things together. Just go back. I can't add greenhouse gases and reforested land and disease is addressed. They're not additive, right? It doesn't solve my problem of aggregation.